Welcome to the first episode of Running on Ice. It's the coolest community in freight where we talk about tech developments, warehouse news, and anything going on in the cold chain world. I'm Cindy Edwards, your host. Now today I'm talking with the Therma CEO and founder, Manik Suri. He's joining us now. Manik, can you hear me? How are you doing?
Doing great, Sydney. Happy Friday and great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Happy Friday to you too. I know it's a great day over here in Freight Alley. I wanted to get into first a bit about Therma, how you joined, and really what Therma's about.
Yeah. Well, I spent a lot of time thinking about that as the founder and how I got into working in the cold chain. The real impetus was trying to help find ways to improve both safety and sustainability. That was an area of passion. I spent some time in finance and then in government, working on economic and regulatory policy, and thought there was an opportunity to build technology in spaces that were kind of underserved. And the supply chain felt like a big area, a huge infrastructure, and part of the economy that was not being attacked and not being tackled with modern technology. And there's just a ton of opportunity there, then both in helping to reduce waste and cost for businesses, and also to help improve sustainability for the planet. And so it was kind of those twin inspirations that got me into cold chain and working with businesses up and down the supply chain.
Well, welcome to the cold chain world. You know, I don't know if you know this or not, but I am relatively new to the business now. Tell me, when was Therma established?
Yeah, so Therma is 2.5 years old. So we started working on the business in late 19, thank you. And always nice to get a little bit of recognition, but it's an early and fast-growing business that we just started right before the pandemic.
Perfect. So let's get into some of Therma's products and a little bit about what Therma does exactly. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we're a smart refrigeration or clean cooling technology platform. We use a combination of IoT sensors, analytics, and controls to help turn refrigeration into intelligent assets. We monitor 24/7, and we also help to create analytics that can turn refrigeration into batteries to save energy and reduce equipment failure and downtime. And of course, product spoilage and loss.
And who exactly would your customers be in this?
Yeah. Right now we sell to businesses, so we don't sell to consumers. It's a business-to-business offering, and we sell to folks up and down the food supply chain primarily. So we work with growers, distributors, folks that have cold storage warehouses and distribution centers. We work with retailers, and of course with hospitality and food service players. Customers include up the supply chain, folks like Taylor Farms, Lineage Logistics, UNFI, 7-Eleven, hotelers like Marriott, Wyndham, Hilton, restaurant chains like Starbucks, McDonald's, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, Domino's, and others.
A lot of players in the game to mention, and this is stationary, correct? It's not necessarily the last mile, it's after the last mile, and it's inside cold storage freezers, and what else maybe?
Yeah, basically any refrigeration environment up and down the supply chain. So starting with the largest format spaces, the distribution centers and cold storage warehouses that might be 10 to 50,000 or even 100,000 to 1 million square feet. We work with a number of warehouse owner operators, both first and third party, so self-owned as well as third party owned. Then we work with folks that have smaller fulfillment centers or micro fulfillment centers, and then of course with retailers, supermarket, convenience store, grocery owner operators. There the boxes tend to get smaller. And then ultimately, we work a ton with folks down closest, as you said, past the last mile, right before the fork, so to speak, that refrigeration that sits between the product and consumers. in amusement parks, hotels, casinos, and of course, restaurants, cafes, and bars.
So today we're talking about supply chain constraints and the impact on the food industry. So let's get into a bit about that. What are the constraints that you're seeing, especially when it comes to the food industry?
Absolutely. So, well, there's a lot of challenges these days, and it depends on kind of what lens you use. On the supply chain side, we're seeing a lot of shortages right now in raw ingredients, and so you're having pressure on pricing and pressure on availability because of a combination of freight and shipping constraints. There's not enough unloading and movement of product coming off of docks. We've got a huge amount of shortage in certain key products because of geopolitical events going on. Some of the instability in Europe and the war going on in the Ukraine has caused a lot of supply chain shortfalls in key product lines. And then on top of that, we've got this significant pressure because of the economic realities of what's going on closer to home. We've got inflation and pressure on prices of things like energy and gas, which is driving up rates and making it harder to get people products, and also wage labor is harder and harder to come by. It's just a shortage in availability of folks to actually help work and both on the supply chain side and in the locations. You're seeing shortages of labor. So all of those are creating pressures both on the product availability and price ultimately. And some of that's being borne by the businesses, some of that's getting passed on to consumers.
So I would actually like to talk specifically about labor shortages and what is at risk when a business is stressed, when employees are stressed at work like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're seeing is, when folks aren't available and you don't have the ability to see in real time what's going on because of labor shortages, you end up having a whole bunch of operating gaps that occur. Those operating gaps might be, for example, around quality or around service delivery or time to task, but also in some cases with the kinds of products and the kinds of use cases we support, we see inventory issues. We have equipment failures that go unmonitored, or power and grid-related energy, electricity failures that end up causing spoilage and loss. So there's a whole range of downstream effects to not having enough people on site. One of the common problems is that you end up with a lot of unforced errors, so to speak, stuff that gets lost or wasted because there weren't enough eyeballs on the task, or stuff was left unmonitored. In cold chain, in particular, that often takes the form of energy and or equipment failure causing the equipment to go down, and then if you don't have people on site checking things, you might lose product or end up with a hotspot in a warehouse, and that's expensive because you're literally throwing dollars into the ground.
This is like a trickle down effect, is what I'm hearing from you, correct?
It is, yeah. It's kind of one of these downstream problems, the unintended, consequences, and it makes sense, when people are so critical to doing these jobs and doing these tasks well, and you have fewer people working at a given location or a few number of hours when locations are staffed, something's got to go, something's got to give.
And if we're talking about human error, products going bad, that's wasted food, wasted money, and we're big on battling the food waste crisis here. So maybe let's get into a bit about that, what you're seeing when it comes to food waste and the crisis that it is.
Yeah. Well, there's a few things that we're seeing. I mean, there's a lot of literature on the food waste crisis and the size of the problem. I think the Boston Consulting Group report on food waste from a few years ago is often cited. I think they say about $1.6 trillion gets thrown out every year. Roughly a third of all the food that gets made is thrown out. That's crazy. You think about it. 1 in every 3 pounds of food that's made is thrown out. And as a country, if that was a country, that would be about it would be like the number 4 source of emissions in terms of global warming. We work on, and we think there's an opportunity to work on the part of that food waste problem that happens in the supply chain, which they say is around 11%, give or take, of the total problem. That's still a massive number. We're talking about over $150 billion a year that gets thrown away. That's just a huge amount of economic waste. And so there's many sources of the problem, but one of the big sources of the problem is the cold chain and the either lack of adequate cold chain or failures in the cold chain that causes product to get thrown out and wasted. And that's the area that Therma is most focused on. We help businesses reduce spoilage and shrink by monitoring assets, catching equipment failure early using predictive models and analytics, and helping to ensure that nothing gets thrown out 24/7. And these are high value perishables. So that's the area of the problem that we focus on, using monitoring and analytics to prevent spoilage and shrink inside stationary refrigeration. But there's a whole bunch of other problems that cause food waste across the supply chain as well.
And of course, being able to monitor that in the freezers eventually saves the company money on what they're wasting, of course. There were a couple stories you'd brought up the last time we talked, one specifically about a wedding. I'd like to get into that one just because I thought it was so interesting.
Yeah. I mean, we see all kinds of stories because of the kinds of businesses we work with. Folks are telling us about real-time events, every week. Recently, we had a customer, a boutique, a high-end hotel that ended up with a spoilage event in their mainline refrigeration just in advance of a major hospitality event, a season, a wedding, which is all the rage now because everyone's finally getting to have those events they couldn't have during the pandemic. They had roughly $80,000 worth of inventory that they nearly lost, but we were able to catch the equipment failure and alert the director of operations, who told his staff about it. This happened on a nighttime occurrence on a weeknight just before the weekend event, when the boxes weren't being staffed and the location was very lightly managed. It would have gone unnoticed because they didn't have alarm and notifications coming off these assets. We were able to catch that event, save them literally close to $100,000 of inventory on a super high-end wedding banquet that was coming. And that's the kind of event that we catch all the time. Now, it's not always $80,000 worth of product. That depends on the kind of business. But there are spoilage and loss events that happen all throughout the life cycle and all throughout the year, many more than people often appreciate.
I'm curious if there's anything specific that happens too often that you notice from companies when they're coming to you saying, we had this issue and we were able to fix it. But is there anything specific that seems to happen?
Yeah, there's a few patterns we see. One is, there's certain types of recurring events. So, for example, inventory delivery and cleaning. People often end up with doors being left open or door jambs that are loose and just burning shelf life, burning energy. So we catch a lot of spoilage and shrink and loss around inventory delivery and around maintenance and cleaning events. Second, we see a lot of issues around grid failures. When utilities have a brownout or a rolling brownout that's kind of unanticipated, a lot of times that causes spoilage and loss because business owners don't know it's happening. This happened a ton with customers of ours in California, where we're based. Over the last few years, as I'm sure many folks know, we had a really bad series of wildfires in Northern California. And the utilities ended up having to run rolling brownouts. Many businesses were affected. And if you have perishables, we had a number of customers who lost significant amounts of inventory during rolling brownouts because they weren't expecting and weren't aware. And those are the kinds of things that happen, unfortunately, all too often now. We also, a third source of the problem around failure and waste is because of equipment, malfunction. We see compressors going out, coolant leaks, wiring issues, all causing unnecessary energy consumption and in many cases overpulling of power. And in some cases, we end up seeing significant spoilage and loss because if that asset goes down and someone's not there, the piece of equipment might be down at night or on the weekend, and you end up coming back to discover, you have to throw out a freezer full of food or a display case full of, valuable product.
You're touching on the energy saving, and I would like to save that for a little bit later in our interview because there's a couple things I know we can get into. But I would like to know if there's anything in the refrigeration world when it comes to something that might be new or any changes in the last decade that you've seen.
Yeah, we've seen a number of, the last decade's a long time for sure. I think we've seen a lot of trends. One of the things I think we're seeing a lot more technology adoption these days going on across customers, across the supply chain. But I think that we've seen a growing focus in the last couple of years on lightweight, low cost technology that could be adopted and ways in which businesses can run leaner and run more efficient without having to make huge capital investments. I think that's a function of just the time we live in. The last couple of years have been really hard for the food and hospitality and retail industries with the pandemic and with so much global uncertainty. And so I think businesses have learned to do more with less and reinvent themselves. We're seeing that in the supply chain. We're seeing that with many, many different types of buyers and how they think about adopting technology, using tools, and automating and monitoring and managing assets better.
I say this because when we last spoke, you'd mentioned comparing the cold chain energy saving, kind of the way that people are doing things, to the 1950s, and how some things, really haven't changed maybe as much as they needed to. But you and I we both know that there are many companies coming out with new ways of saving, and so I loved your comparison to calling it something from years ago.
Yeah, I think that the broad framework was the assets themselves, the piece of equipment in the refrigeration cold chain, are still run like it's 1950, in the sense that they're not connected to the cloud. They're generally not being optimized with data science. If you think about it, just ask yourself: does anyone turn refrigeration on and off when energy prices change? Energy prices change every day, all day, throughout the year. I haven't met a business that turns refrigeration on and off dynamically based on energy prices. That's a simple but kind of a clear example of we're leaving a lot of value on the table because these pieces of equipment, these assets, are still run, so to speak, dumb. They're not connected to the cloud. You can't remote control them and turn them up and down. We have a bunch of customers in the K through 12 education industry. The school districts and schools we work with are often closed for several months in the year. And so utilization's pretty low, if not zero. Well, very few of those operators actually touch the settings and the set points on their assets. So you've got stuff running at full tilt, even though no one's using it, no one's there. Those are kinds of examples of why these pieces of equipment in this asset layer is still run dumb, and why there's a lot of opportunity to improve and save money in the process.
It's like when you're walking downtown and you see all these businesses with these lights on inside. The businesses are closed, but I myself always wonder, why are we using the energy to keep these lights on when we could be saving it? Why is it so necessary? I know Therma's working on a new product, smart refrigeration. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's exactly to that example, Sydney. In the past, when energy was cheap and the planet was subsidizing it, we could all afford to have a lot of inefficiency. And so you go into a downtown and you look at these skyscrapers late at night. Lights are still on, HVAC systems are still running, even though no one's there. That made sense when energy was cheap and there was a lot of it. But that was coming at the cost of our planet, because we were using fossil fuels primarily. That's most of the 20th century. What I think we're seeing as a society is, in the last couple of decades, it's catching up with us. And now energy is getting more expensive, both economically and from the standpoint of the cost to the planet. The cost of pulling those resources out of the ground and burning them into the atmosphere is actually getting pretty high. And so we're living in a moment where we have to decide, are we going to keep doing things wastefully and just throwing dollars away and throwing more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, or are we going to try and do more with less? And that's why I think there's a huge push around resource efficiency as one of the big parts of the climate movement and ways to try and address global warming. I think resource efficiency is literally about using resources like energy more effectively, more efficiently, doing more with less. What we're trying to do at Therma is bring that methodology and that approach into refrigeration. And so we've started building a solution that can turn refrigeration up and down and on and off dynamically. That intelligence that smart refrigeration allows us to tap differentials in price to save businesses money by running the equipment more when energy is cheaper and running it less when it's more expensive, by turning it up and down in response to utilization For example, when no one's there and there's nothing inside, don't need to run it at full tilt. And so that kind of idea that you could run refrigeration intelligently is something that we've started building and scaling as a second layer of our solution.
I'm curious if they would look similar to the sensors that you have now. Would the product be similar like that?
It is. I mean, we've deployed it this year, so it's similar to the sensors in the sense that it's a drop-in-place solution. And the idea here is that you don't need to have expensive hardware installation, and there's not, you're not purchasing a very expensive product. We're selling both the monitoring and the optimization or intelligence solution as a subscription-based product. So you're not buying expensive hardware or paying for expensive installation and maintenance. And in that sense, the idea is to make it really easy and really simple for our customers, and not have to get into a huge headache and heartache around how do we actually adopt this technology and deploy it in our locations.
And so are each customer able to customize what they need this for each product maybe that they have in their business?
Yes. I mean, there's a number of areas where you can turn dials up and down or on and off. You can set controls around the monitoring, and you can set threshold values around the alerting and notifications based on the kind of equipment, the type of product inside, what kind of business you run, what geography you're in terms of how warm or cold it is, and of course your own preferences around how sensitive or open-ended you want to be about getting notifications. Similarly, with our controls layer and the optimization, you can dial up and dial down the optimization and get more savings or less, depending on how much you want to turn your refrigeration into a battery, so to speak, and tap it. And that's, again, depends on what kind of business you run, the compliance needs, the kind of product you have inside, how often it's being opened and closed and used.
And how much might this save a company when it comes to their energy bill?
So we're right now seeing between 10 and 15% savings from the smart refrigeration product, which is pretty significant and adds up over time. 10 to 15% a month starts to look like meaningful dollars, especially considering that the product doesn't have a installation or hardware fee. It's a subscription-based product, so it's really designed to sit on top of your existing stack.
And I do love the idea of this product. I'm curious what you've heard from companies that are using it currently.
Yeah, we're hearing very positive feedback. We're building an entire marketing effort around this product over the summer and fall. Energy prices are obviously rising and on everyone's mind right now with inflation and with the summer being especially a time when it's hot and people are trying to get outdoors and travel. So I think that energy is on everyone's mind right now. And definitely we're getting a lot of feedback that, hey, this is something we could use help with. We want to make sure our energy costs don't get crazy. So I think it's very topical because of what's going on in the world and the timing. And I also think that businesses are starting to think about the climate and the sustainability impact of their efforts and about how they can both do the right thing and also market and message it to their customers. And so a lot of our early adopters are saying, hey, this is a great solution because it saves me money. I need to save money in this operating environment, and this is good for the planet. There's a carbon calculator in our product, and you can actually see the emissions reduction. And we're telling our customers, hey, you should market that. You should absolutely embrace that. And it's green technology. We call it clean cooling, but it's a way to do the right thing. You should get the win for that with your customers. And so I think there's a number of reasons why our early adopters are very excited about the product, both from a profitability and from a sustainability standpoint.
Now, Manik, before I let you go, please tell me, where can folks find more about you, more about Therma?
Always a pleasure to chat with folks that are interested. We're online and we're also hiring and growing. We are available for reach outs both on our website, hellotherma.com, HELLO, Therma, THERMA, hellotherma.com. I'd love to connect directly if folks are interested. My contact is Manik, MANIK, at hellotherma.com. We're on LinkedIn and Twitter. We're about 60 people based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. We're hiring. We have 15 open roles. We're raising capital, always looking to partner with folks and find new partners and customers. So please reach out.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I always appreciate it, and I look forward to learning more about this clean cooling and the smart refrigerator. So thank you so much for joining.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now tonight on Running on Ice newsletter, if you are not subscribed, you gotta get subscribed to the newsletter. You can go to freightwaves.com to subscribe. It's Running on Ice, much like this podcast and show, and that comes out tonight at 7 p.m. And don't wait up, because next week I'll be talking with the folks at Tithe, and we're getting into saving loads and how getting there before the customer knows that there's an issue keeps customers coming back. You won't want to miss it. That'll be here Running on Ice next week, Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern.